Hey, Neil, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I definitely follow the podcast and following the social media, so it's exciting. But yeah, my background, I was born into sales, so to speak.
Yeah,
Was,
that must have been uncomfortable.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was. So my parents are both in real estate, and as young as I can remember, my mom used to actually have these events. So she was a realtor. She invited all of her clients every year, and essentially, I was working the room, and I didn't even know what it meant. Right? They were like, "Oh,
Yeah.
your mom's amazing." I was like, "She's the best." And so I was in that. I was as a kid, I was already competitive in little league. I was selling raffle tickets and always trying to win and winning awards every year. I got to college. I sold meal plans, and then I got a job with a company in real estate that said we'll pay you commissions if you can help us rent out all these houses. So I did that.
Yeah.
Got into real estate out of college, and then when the market tanked in real estate, a buddy of mine said, "Hey, if you know software, if you know sales, learning software is easy. You should really get into technology sales." So I transitioned and been selling cybersecurity ever since for going on about 14 years.
So you like it, huh?
Oh yeah, it
Yeah.
worked out.
Cool. And what do you like about sales?
So I'm a people's person. I love to quote Office Space, right? I always like working with people. It's
Yeah.
I can't sit here by myself. That's why COVID's been rough. So I've
Yeah.
made the best of having a lot of Zoom meetings, Zoom lunches, Zoom happy hours, all that stuff. But I am definitely one of those people that's a pack animal that likes to be with people.
Eh, like the variety, like being out in the field, is that what?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean I'm definitely I'm a social creature by nature, right? I mean
Yeah.
it's definitely that's how I live.
Cool. And how did you learn the security stuff?
So actually, it was funny. So I was very fortunate. The first company I worked for was run by engineers. They were not salespeople. They were very metrics driven. It was how many calls have you made? How many meetings did you set up? How many made contacts was it? I mean, it was everything was metrics driven. So what happened was when I got there were all these trainings you had to go through. There was, they sent us to Dale Carnegie for the sales side. Then they were like, sit down with our engineers, and you're going to have to present this back to the engineers. And so it's when you're young and you're call it naive and you don't know that the world is different, it was the right place to learn because I didn't know that wasn't normal. And
Yeah.
so I got a chance to learn I mean, they were like, tell us the 7 layers of the network. I was like, well, what's a network? I know a lot of people. They're like, no. The network on the computer. And I was like, oh, okay. So now it's, I started that naive, and then all of a sudden I started learning the technology very quickly, and the sales side came naturally, and it just worked out.
Yeah. 'Cause it's a lot to learn, right? A lot of
Yeah,
acronyms.
I mean, I'm still learning every day. It's not like it's it's not
Yeah.
something that anybody ever masters to a point where they know everything.
And what do you think separates you as a salesperson?
So actually, I think going back to the social creature, right? One of the things that early in my career happened. A buddy of mine was working for this software company, and he said, "This place is going to change the world. You got to come work here." And so he got me an interview, and I was like, "This is awesome." It was supposed to be an hour long. It went for 2.5 hours. I was like, "They're going to hand me the job." And they asked me the question, "How many accounts can you walk us into tomorrow?" And I said, "I'll get you in any account you want." They said, "No, I don't think you understand. Like, we have a 6 month ramp here. Our sales cycles are 6 months. And if you don't have relationships to walk us into today, you're
Yeah.
not going to be here in 6 months. You're not doing me favors. You're not doing yourself any favors. We can't hire you." And I was like, "Oh my God, what do I do?" So then I overcompensated, and I spent a lot of time building relationships with decision makers to the point where I've actually built out, I sell cybersecurity. So CISOs are the decision makers, chief information security officers. And I built out a CISO roundtable that I've been doing monthly for years. And so now I have direct access to a ton of decision makers from overcompensating from losing a job.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because I like that idea
Yeah.
because I sold cybersecurity as well.
Yeah.
And what worked for me, at least then, was user groups of
Yep.
the product they bought before they bought mine.
Oh, there you go. I like that. Yeah.
So it wasn't competitive. So there was no product overlap. And they were always looking for guest speakers, somebody to entertain the audience or something new.
Yeah.
And the people there were going to be the exact people I wanted to talk to. So
Yeah.
how'd you come up with this idea? Did it already exist or was it all yours?
So I took a bunch of other ideas and made it my own. They say plagiarism is copying, research is copying
It was
research.
someone else's idea until I did it.
Yeah, yeah, it was. I researched it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it started. So there was a. We do a lot of business with what we call resellers. So just think
Yep.
partners, consulting companies. And I saw one where he was doing a steakhouse every month, and he was getting 60 to 70 people to show up. And I was like, holy cow! And he charged a lot of money for these things. And I was like, this is crazy. And then I had a buddy of mine that said he was in Texas and he started going to a barbecue that was like, I don't know, top three in Texas, which may as well be top three in the world because Texas barbecue is like, it's what they're
But
known for.
yeah.
And so he was just doing a bi-weekly thing where he's like, I'll stand in line because it's 2 hours long. You guys show up, I'll pay for lunch and we'll just chat. And he was getting 10 to 20 people to show up. So I took both of those, I married those together and said, well, what if I grab a couple people I do know? Because at that point I knew a couple decision makers. And I said, hey guys, let's just do a monthly lunch. And they were like, all right, that sounds cool. And I was like, I'm not putting on my sales hat. It's
Right.
education for me. It's a chance for you guys to talk about the things you want to talk about. And I'll pick up the tab. And they were like, all right, cool. So it started out with 6 of us. And then, they liked it so much. Then it was 8, then it was 10, then it was 20, then it was 30, then it was 40. And so it's grown and I've continued to do it. And I think the key to the whole thing is that it's never been about me. It's always been about them. And so what we do is I send an email a week before and say, hey, send me your questions, whatever you want to talk about. And I moderate the discussion and essentially let the leaders talk to each other. And then they're grateful because I can introduce them to their peers. If they say, I've got this project and it's not related to me, I could say, hey, Bill was working on that too. I should make an introduction. And so
Yeah.
it's worked out and we'll call it dumb luck, right? I came into it for the education. I didn't realize I'd become like the world's greatest connector, right?
Well, yeah, that's it. You're a connector, kind of in
Yep.
Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point
Yep.
metaphor. And I think the best salespeople are like that. Too many salespeople look at if there's not a deal now, go away.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's kind of short-sighted.
I had a manager. He was not a people's person. He hired me, and he was a good guy, but he was very technical, not really a sales guy. And the one piece of advice I'll never forget is he said, "Everybody has value. You just have to figure out what it is."
Right.
I think that's
Yeah.
very true. Is that it doesn't matter if there's a deal today or not. They may know somebody. I mean, hell, maybe you like the same music and they introduce you to a new group or something. But everybody's got value somewhere.
And that's what people don't get about things like LinkedIn and social media.
Oh yeah,
It's not about posting your crap. It's about
yeah,
connecting with other people.
yeah, yeah.
And just
Yeah.
because they're not buying today doesn't mean they can't help you find somebody who is.
Well, and that's why I love your videos. It's funny. So I'm a big creative thinker. Anything you can do that's different. And podcasts are awesome, but not many people are spending an hour listening to them.
Oh,
So your bite-sized videos are perfect because I'm in between meetings. I pop on and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And you listen for a minute, and then it gives you it's the hook of okay, I want to hear more.
yeah.
And so I love that idea, and I think those are brilliant for that reason.
Well, that's it. People go, why do you do it? And it's like, I'm walking anyway,
Right.
and I'm thinking about sales. So that's my bag.
Yep.
That's what I do for a career. And it's like, how do you put a little nugget into a 1.5-minute video?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's 100% of a give.
Yep.
I don't pitch a thing in any of the videos.
Yeah.
And if you get something out of it, great. You still get haters, but that's life, right?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, they say if no one's mad at you, no one hates you, you're just not working hard enough.
Right.
So, yep.
And how have you gotten support for this from your company
So,
before it worked?
well, it's funny. So the way before it worked, I mean, first of all, so I sell pretty expensive software, so they're going to spend money. I mean, it's any software, especially cybersecurity, you're typically looking at 6 figures. It's just
Yeah.
life. And so they know they've got to spend money. So you don't get a whole lot of people questioning the money you're spending. And the lunches were a couple $100. I mean, the 6 people, I was going to a local restaurant. I wasn't taking them to like
There's no cocktails or anything. There's
Yeah,
no band.
Yeah, I was saying let's grab lunch at a really cool local restaurant with local food.
Yeah.
And so, everybody went and it worked. And then as it got bigger, before COVID and we were doing this in person, I had a bunch of people approach me like, hey, I'll pay for this. And so I handpicked somebody that I work well with. And I said, okay, I'll let you pay for this. And so basically every month, we were doing it at a country club and they were picking up lunch and everybody enjoyed it. And it worked out for everybody because now they had access. I was able to do this without anybody looking over my shoulder saying, why haven't all 30 of these people bought our product yet? And you just keep taking them out to lunch, right? And no one's asking me any of that. And then I've transitioned from company to company by still doing this. And I've never had an issue, but I did try to pull away from the expense aspect of it by letting others pay for it because I built something of value.
And how do you keep them away from it turning into a sales presentation or an
Well,
infomercial?
so I told them up front that that's the deal. This isn't sales. Like I've
Right,
coached
but
them.
they're kind of like pre-programmed though, right?
Well, but I've coached them on from
Yeah,
the beginning of like, here's what I expect, and they were pretty good about it. But I don't switch vendors. It's not like I switch. It's the same people that come every time, so they know. And
yeah.
I basically said, if you provide value, people take your call, right? Because somebody told me there's 8,000 cybersecurity vendors out there, and I remember talking to a CISO.
Is that all?
Yeah, he's exactly right. That was yesterday's count. Today's double that. So it's so yeah. So one of the CISOs said, imagine if I took 10 to 30 minutes every day that everyone's asking for and met with them, I'd never do my job. And
Right.
so if you can do something of value, you get to be one of those, you know, division of that where people will actually take your meetings because it's, oh, Neil brings value to me. Let's meet with Neil. And so when I explain that, I don't think I've had any issues where they bring up product. And I even start with a joke. I work for Anomaly. They pay my bills. If you're thinking about, cybersecurity threat intelligence, let me know. And then I'll get into now let's talk about what you want to talk. And everybody chuckles and they'll even make jokes about me being the sales guy in the room, but everybody respects me or at least pretends to. And they continue to take my calls. So I appreciate it.
And outside of this circle,
Mhm.
what separates you? Because I think that's a great idea.
I would say creativity. I'm big on doing the things others don't. I
Yeah.
think there's multiple mediums that you have to approach with, right? So, you hear all this stuff like cold calling's dead, relationships dead, whatever the buzzword is of the day. But if you take all of them, one of them is going to work, right? One works 1 month, one works the next. I like direct mailers. I think that's always been effective. But instead of sending something directly to the leader, send something to their admin, like, a coffee cup that says you make the magic happen, and then ask her for a place in the calendar, him for a place. And I think doing creative things that are different, as opposed to the insanity of the same thing over and over again. I think that's always separated me. And the other thing is, according to Amazon, I read 51 books last year, which means I was lazy for 1 week. So
Wow.
it's so I'm always trying to educate myself. I think that separates me too.
Because I think the creativity is critical because you don't see much of that. Everybody wants to be told the magic cadence.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, no, because we're dealing with people.
And that's it. It's the human element. I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what are some of the other things that you've learned along the way that you wish you knew when you got out of
Yeah, Shannon.
college?
I would say the mistake I've made in my career, which I don't know if I'd call it a mistake because I've learned from it, is that I've switched companies too quickly many times.
Yeah.
Somebody will say, "We're going to pay you so much more money. Come to this company," and early on in your career, like someone wants to pay me that, and it's all of a sudden it's like, holy cow! And so the competitor wants to pay more, and so I would say there's some places I probably could have stuck around longer and made more money. I've switched companies many times. I'm happy where I'm at now, which is a good thing, but I think I didn't move up the chain, and I ended up deciding I wanted to stay a sales rep. And I may get into management one day, but I had a short stint in management. But I think because of my short stays, it was never even an option. It wasn't like, oh well, keep working your tail off and you're going to go up the chain and run a team. It was like, oh man, this guy's crushing it, and then all of a sudden, oh, he just left. He's got another opportunity. So I think if I could go back, I would convince myself to stick these things out a little bit longer instead of jumping for something that looks a little greener.
And I think we all either make that mistake or we don't know when to leave
Yeah.
or when to stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
What have you learned along that line?
So I think every company is flawed, I think is what I've learned along the way.
Really? You haven't found the perfect one yet?
Yeah, well, it's close. It's out. Just kidding. But I think initially I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and I thought that I was going to find the perfect place. And then every time I get there, you hit either the executives aren't they're not executing as the vision that you dreamed the company was going to do. If they just turn left, we'd crush it, but they're turning right, or you find a manager and you're like, man, this guy's a pain in the neck. And I've got some stories about that too. But it's you leave for the wrong reasons because one thing makes you angry, and then you're like, oh man. And I'm not even an emotional guy, so I can only imagine how angry other people are. But I think those are the things that that I would have changed was just not jumping so quickly.
Well, I think a lot of people jump, like when they get the new comp plan is the classic
Yeah.
one, where you go from crushing it to now, from 15% to 3%.
Yeah.
And that you go through commission withdrawal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then someone
Absolutely.
calls. Well, what's most important to you when you look at a company?
Product. I want to make sure that the product's relevant. I
Oh,
care more than anything else that what I'm selling, because for me, being a relationship guy, or at least a self-proclaimed one, I don't want to be, I jokingly say, I don't want to be the guy at the grocery store that you see me in the frozen food aisle and you turn and run. Like if you live in my neighborhood, I want to make sure that you're not running away from Neil. And so I want to make sure the products I sell stand up for what I say they do, so
yeah.
that nobody calls me a liar or says, "What did you do to me?"
And have you found a way of determining that before you're 6 months into it?
Yeah, so actually what I do first is market research, right? I reach out to existing customers and say, what do you think about the product?
Okay,
Now that I've
smart.
established myself and I have some good relationships, when I interviewed for jobs, I would actually take one of these security leaders and say, hey, I want you to check this product out with me, which both improves your interview process because like, holy cow, this guy's already bringing in a lead for us. And then secondly, it helps you out because you've got a guy you trust that's taking a look at it and saying, hey, this really seems like something cool that I think you should be digging into. And then I have some more technical people myself take a look, and I look at market share and I look at the opportunity. I like working for the underdogs. I like working for the startups, but I want to know that there's enough room to grow in that space versus, I don't want to go sell against Amazon, right? It's, whoever it is that owns a
Well,
market or whatever it is.
well, that's the problem with security is that you got the what 3,000? Did you say or 8,000?
8,000, 8,000. Yeah.
8,000. So
Yeah.
there's always going to be overlap,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
then the keywords are always overused, meaning like
Oh yeah. Buzzword bingo.
firewall,
Yep.
encryption, whatever it is.
Yep. Yep.
So when you're talking to somebody, it takes a long time to drill down on how it's different.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, somebody put it really well for me the other day is that integration matters more than innovation. And I think because the point that there's so many products in this space, I think when you start to look at how does it integrate with my ecosystem, the example used was if I own an iPhone and I've got a Mac, it's very unlikely I'm going to go buy things related to Windows. And
Right.
so if you can buy things that relate to their ecosystem, and I think that's it, is if a product's claiming to change the world, you then start to ask, well, what do you integrate with, right? What are these are the major systems people are using. How do you tie into that and understand the story as opposed to we're going to change the world because they've been doing it wrong? That's probably not going to resonate as well as we're going to change the world because they're so close.
Yeah. And how about as far as the manager? Because I usually tell people the manager's really critical because
Yeah.
great managers don't go to crummy companies.
Yeah. And I think one of the ways I judge a manager is how many people come with them along the journey.
Yeah.
When they bring a couple people with them. I've had more bad managers than good, and maybe that's just a bias, but
No,
I,
that's
I
normal.
like I like my current one, so that's a good situation. I like my current one a lot.
Yeah.
He complements me in a lot of ways. He has strengths that I don't have, and I like to think I have some he doesn't have. And so I have a good manager, but I don't put as much credence in management, probably because so many bad experiences. The only thing I care about is I had one manager call me. So when my oldest daughter, and I have three kids, my oldest daughter was maybe a year or two old. I messed something with Salesforce. I think instead of putting like $100,000, I put $1 million, and there's a certain dollar amount that triggers every manager under the sun where it's like, oh, we've got this $1 million deal. Everybody's got a call about this. So he calls me up, and it was just a 4-letter tirade, just unbelievable. And I'm sitting there trying to feed my daughter. It's 6 o'clock my time. He's based in, the West Coast. And he starts screaming at me. And I said, man, I apologize. I promise I'm going to fix this. So can we talk about it in a minute, or in the morning? I'm busy feeding my daughter. I get an email like 10 minutes later titled, what was it? Job Focus. He said, you're so busy changing diapers, you're not focused on your job. And he's like, starting tomorrow, you're no longer a remote employee because I've worked in my house forever. You'll be working at an office that's 45 minutes from your house, going every day. And I was there for another 2 months. I mean, I was like, I'm not sticking around for this. So I look for those things. Like if my manager can be the worst that ever lived, but if I like them, I'll work for them because I feel like I can be effective. If they add value, even better. But I care more about the personal
If
aspect.
they had value.
So
Well, that's it. I think a lot of people, when they get into management, they forget what their objective is. It's
Yeah.
not to administrate what's going on.
Yeah.
It's to increase revenue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
they don't increase revenue themselves. They have to work with the team.
Yeah. And a lot of them are so focused on increasing deal size as opposed to actually adding value. And it's crazy. And I'm not saying that's wrong, because I think there is merit to that, but that shouldn't be your only job. That
Um,
shouldn't be the only thing that you're doing, is saying, well, you just can't negotiate, so I got to jump in here. There's got to be more to it. So to answer your question about management, I care more that I get along with the personality. And then, like I said, if they add value, it used to be I was looking for a mentor everywhere I could look. I was like, man, teach me something. And then I kind of gave up on that. I
yeah.
found mentors externally. I have one now that's not even in sales. And the amount of things I talk to him once a week, the amount of things I learned from this guy who's a security leader, just about business, about life, about just how to operate, is unreal. So if you look for mentors in the right place, you'll find them, but don't always assume it's going to be your manager.
That's a great point, because I think a lot of people look for that or just assume that since
Yeah.
they're in charge, they know what they're doing.
Yeah. And that's a mistake. Yeah. That's absolutely a mistake. Yeah.
Uh, what have been the signals that it's a great company? I mean, have you worked with headhunters? Do you typically follow other people? What are the signals that it's the right time to jump to another company?
So I'm actually very proactive. I've actually looked. Again, I'll go back to my contacts that are outside of sales, and I'll say, "Hey, what is the coolest thing that you've seen lately?" And they'll say, "Oh, we're looking at these cool, doohickeys." And I'm like, "All right, well, how many doohickeys are in the market?" And then I start to look and say, "Well, who's in that space that's really interesting?" And then I'll start to look at the people and say, "Is it somewhere I can work?" But I've been pro. There's been some companies like the one I mentioned where I was like, "I have to get out of." And it took
Yeah.
me 2 months to get out of there. And the first thing I did was reach out to some people I knew and say, what's cool out there? And then I reached out to the company and I said, I don't know if you have a position or not. Said, but I think your product's awesome. I think I can add some value. Can we talk? And it just so happened that the local rep was being promoted to management. And he's like, I need to backfill. I haven't even opened the position yet. Let's talk.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting the job, and I was there for 2.5 years and did really well and really liked it. They changed CEOs and every executive under the sun, which is why I left that company. But when I got there, it was really cool. But I think the signs for me is, again, it goes back to, is the technology relevant? Is it something that no one's going to hide from me in the frozen food aisle, right?
But there's also like the element of comp plan where if you get in a company, they had a great last year. So this year's got to be 2 or 3 times what last year was.
Yeah,
And it just doesn't match what the market is. They're kind of ahead of the market.
that matters. Yeah, that
Yeah.
matters. Yeah, I would even say, I mean, so I tend to work in the smaller companies, so I end up with bigger territories, right? I'm not I was the road warrior for a while before all this happened. I like being home because I like being with my kids and my family, but if there's money, I'm willing to go a couple days a week to travel for it. And so I think the comp plans are generally the same. I think the key is the upside is, one is, what does the territory look like? I don't want 10 accounts. There's a lot of people really good with that. I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And so I like having 3 states, 4 states, 5 states, whatever it is. And I want to know how relevant it is to that market. And then I want to know the comp plan of the potential. Is my quota going to be $5 or $500 million? And what is your product's average sale price? How am I going to get there? And so
Yeah.
looking at those things, I think, make a big difference. But it's relevancy matters, but comp plan definitely matters too.
And what do you see most salespeople doing wrong? I'm sure you've had a lot of experience, good and bad.
I think so. There's a couple things. So one, I am now, again, admitting bias here. Like, I think the lone wolf, I think, is going to struggle when there's, and I don't mean that from a rep perspective, but I mean that from, if you don't use the resources inside your company and you just assume you know everything, I think a lot of those guys will struggle. You don't have to be friends with every rep in the company, but you need to know who the right resources are, because there's always experts in your company you can leverage.
Yeah.
And it's so when a comedian goes on stage, there's somebody that introduces them. When a keynote speaker goes on stage, someone introduces them. You're the person introducing them. So you're introducing the expert. If you're assuming you're the expert, you've already lost credibility. So
Yeah.
it's being able to understand the resources that are in your company and using those, and playing that connector again of who can I introduce you to that's going to help you. And I see a lot of people that try to take on too much weight on their own shoulders and assume they're going to do it on their own. And I think those people fail.
Oh, there's the people that try and sell top down versus bottom up.
Yeah.
And each product's different and each market and account is different.
Yep.
Do you do bottom up or top down, or does it depend?
So I would say I do more top down, but that's only because where I'm at in my career.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with bottom up. I think the way it was put to me by one of these leaders is that, so two things. One is that if you were going to sell a car to a kid, the 16-year-old is probably the one that wants to buy the car and he needs the car, but who's really making the decision?
Right.
So if he tells you how much he's got, he's going to say, I've got $1,000 in my bank. But if you talk to the parents, they're going to say, oh, well, we've saved up $4,000 for this car and we could, and whatever it is, right? He's getting a used car that's a little bit nicer, a little bit more money. So if you start at the bottom, you have a limited budget to work from with a big need. If you start at the top, you've got a budget that's willing to solve problems that may not have the same level of need, but they'll introduce you to those that do. And if you can marry the two, it's much easier to do from the top to the bottom, in my opinion.
And are you always finding the CISO is kind of, I hate the word decision maker because there's so many decisions.
Yeah.
Just typically
They're not always the decision maker.
No, right. They're involved.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you ask, right? I mean, the question is, when you've bought software like this in the past, what did the process look like? And if the answer is, well, my CISO needs to sign off and he's got authority, then that's probably your guy. If the answer is, we've got a technology committee of these 5 groups and they're all going to have a say, great. Well, how do we meet with them to make sure that we're meeting all their needs, right? Because we'll make you look like the superstar, but you may have different criteria than they have. Let me help you, cross those boxes and help you do what you need to do. But it's not always. I mean, CISO is a generic term for leader in my mind. I overuse the word, but it's
I think everybody does.
Security's funny too, because CISOs sometimes are only responsible for governance, not products, and then IT operations runs it. So it depends on the company.
Yeah, sometimes they're kind of almost an oversight role versus a line responsible.
Yep. So I just use that as a generic term because it's easier than explaining every time. It's either leader or CISO, but it really is just whoever has the P&L. That's who's going to control it.
And what is in your way of really crushing it? What, either skill or what happens in the market?
That's a good question. I would say, there's been a few different things, right? There's been times where I got a little bit cocky and said, holy cow, I hit 200% of my number last year. And then I realized I spent not enough time prospecting and suddenly the pipeline's dry. Or there's been times where, I didn't understand the product as well as I thought I did. And next thing I know, I feel like I'm selling the same thing as everybody else. And that's why I believe so much in education is understand your own gaps and figure out how to fill those. But I think there's a lot of things. I would say last year, the thing that got in my way was that I was banking on some big deals. And then when the market turned, all of a sudden these companies we're freezing our budgets. And so I didn't have nearly as big of a year as I thought. The year before was the biggest year I've ever had financially. And then last year was, we'll call it mediocre. But after that, it's you make a ton of money. Doesn't matter what you make the next year. It's not going to feel like much.
And that's it, because in the technology space, and certainly in the security space, you can get stuck in the education versus the buying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like those lunches, they're great, but they're really relationship building. And if something sticks, great.
Well, so what those do for me, and that's a really good point. What those do for me is they give me access to other decision makers. Right. So it's when somebody else I hear has a project, I don't have to run around and scramble and say, how do I meet this person? I just look on LinkedIn and say, oh, look, Dave's connected to this guy. Let me ask Dave to make an introduction. And suddenly I'm in the door, or at least hearing back, they've already thought about you and you're just not going to have a chance. I don't have to waste time there.
Because you must see other reps, at the end of the year, they were busy. They're working 60, 70 hours a week, but they're 60 to 80% of their number.
Yep.
Where they're spending a lot of time educating the market for people that will buy someday, but not this day.
Yeah. Well, we're all guilty of it at some level, right? It's
easy. It's a trap, right?
Yeah. It's. I think, what do they say? It's being busy doesn't always mean being successful.
Right. And, in sales, it just feels good, doesn't it? Right? Yeah. Because it has the same feeling as selling, but Absolutely. Not the same result.
Yeah. You feel good at the end of the day. You've worked your 8 to 10 hours and you're like, I was in meetings all day. And then you look and you're like, wow, I got absolutely nothing new. It's all of a sudden, wow, what happened?
Do you have some kind of asset test to determine, where you are in the sales process, or is this a sales process, or is this an education
I
process?
mean, I have my process that I try to follow and check the boxes of like, has the decision maker been involved yet? And in that case, in software, it's almost always proof of concepts or POCs. And
Yeah.
so before I get into a POC, have I met somebody that's actually signing off saying this is legitimately, it doesn't have to be budgeted, but does it fill a big enough need that we can find money for it?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably my biggest thing. I'm probably not as organized as I should be from that perspective, but I want to know that if I'm getting into the point where I'm going to be spending at least a couple days, a month or week with them, that I'm at least spending my time somewhere where there's a return potential.
So, and last question, what would your advice be for other people that are in the security space? What's the one distinction that you see between like an A plus and just like a B plus player?
I would say, one, don't make it about you. When you're out there meeting with people, get to know the people, get to know what they care about. I mean, I have an old customer that loves Star Wars, but he was so angry with the new series of them because they're calling it commercialized. So I would send him text jokingly anytime something new would come out, like on Disney Plus when they, The Mandalorian come out, and I was like, "Are you going to watch this?" Knowing he was going to send me back, a whole paragraph or two about why this was such a bad idea. And I would say my advice is get to know these guys, because when you send that text and they respond instantly versus the, "Hey, can we talk?" Like you're not always going to get that response.
It's the want to talk with you instead of only when they have to talk with
Right,
you.
exactly. Yeah, make them interested so that they look and they say, "Oh, it's Neil, I'm going to respond," versus the, "Oh my God, he's asking again."
Right. Where is it? What's the next
Yeah.
step? Touch
Yeah.
and base.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Exactly.
Hey, Neil, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I don't really use Twitter that much, but I am on Twitter. But
Yeah.
yeah, feel free to connect. I love
TikTok? No.
people. Yeah, I'm not on TikTok. No.